David's chasing the question of what could broadly be said a revolution. You start with the idea of social change, of how something changes. And what David finds interesting about human societies is not so much that they change and that they change when revolutionary situations happen, when their class struggles are at higher points or whatever. What is interesting is that societies do not change in all the rest of the times. How is that possible? Why is that the case? Why do you have to wait for some kind of situation? What do people do? Well, conventional approach tells us that societies are sort of like organisms or self-balancing systems. They like an animal or like ecosystem. They keep going in existing form until they cannot go any longer, and when some kind of conflict reaches the highest point, only then opportunity to change arises. Well, this approach for David is missing all the intentional actions of people who actually wake up every day and make society happen again. Make society happen again in the same form as it was yesterday. It just doesn't happen by nature or by God's design or something like that. Someone has to have an intention to do so, and like everyone has to have an intention to do so. The word we use for broadly describing people's tendency to produce the society in a certain form is value. The value of action in this context is ability of any action to create a society where people seek an opportunity to emulate this action. It's like actions producing themselves. And chasing the question of value, one of the pieces that underlines the question of value is a practice of fetishism. So this is where this piece comes into discussion. The fetishism was entered into public debate in around 1700 something or 1800 something. The history has to do with Portuguese merchants sailing to Africa, trying to exchange glass beads and different kind of junk for gold. Well, what the merchants discovered is that every time you have to exchange something, you have to go through some kind of ritual with people you're going to exchange things. You have to kind of create a market. You have to stipulate the rates of exchange, the regimes of property, and so on. And the practices that the Christian merchants sailing in, and if you ask Christian merchants, would you honor the rules of your deal, he would say, yes, I swear by God. But what would African person swear by? And what ends up happening is that African people just take different bits of junk, wood, whatever, uh, stones, anything that like a leg of an animal or something, or like mix some dirt in a drink and in the water and drink it, and that would be, and they would name that thing by some kind of name, and then say that this thing would have power over us. It would punish us if we do not respect the terms of the deal that we're making with you. So for European merchants who've been looking for like you need a god on other side with whom you could like make a deal, and there isn't a god, they can see that these African people just make up uh, deities on the fly. The term fetish is interesting. What David shows in this piece. What term fetish is interesting in it. By the time these merchants arrive in Africa, Christian thought already has an idea of idol. That is, a, any image of supernatural entity which isn't Christian God is a demon, and as like what pagans worship, some kind of devils, demons which influence them. This idea at least accepts the existence of supernatural behind beliefs of whatever the other, right? What merchants was trying to avoid exactly by calling it fetish is to point out that, well, these African people are so stupid they can't even properly believe in demons. There is no supernatural behind their fetish, behind their idols, because, well, they just, it is visible how they pick up anything and then just agree on the spot to treat it as some kind of supernatural entity. So that was very disturbing for for the materialistically inclined European merchants, and they tried to reduce the Africans to some kind of arbitrary state. that well, uh, the value for Africans is arbitrary. They treat gold. They know that gold is important, but they exchange it for useless junk. So like, and even in the domain of religion, of social values, they can just make up anything and just agree to treat it as valuable. Well, this is origin of the story of fetish, how it entered in European debate, and by the 1930 it accumulated so many different meanings that it was decided to basically abandon the term. Uh, it became it stopped meaning anything. But for David's research, it was necessary to go back to influence of Marx, and Marx employed the term of fetish to the specifically different kind of usage. When sociology and Marx included talk about fetish, the conventional understanding is that, I quote basically, we are used to seeing fetishism as an illusion. We create things and then fall down and worship that which we ourselves have made. That is, anytime we are in the presence of a fetish, we can see people treating inanimate objects as possessing consciousness, intelligences, and wills, uh, treating inanimate or even invisible objects as people for purposes of entering into relationships with them. Like, you can think that object has a capacity to judge you or to inspire you or to offend you or something like that. Well, this is what Marx springs from. He looks at the 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 theory of fetishism for Marx is a part of his alienation idea that basically the only whenever human feels that something anticipated his intention, his needs, he has no way except treating that experience as another human. what Marx calls a false consciousness, and later anthropologists called partial consciousness, is the same idea. Basically, in the experience of a person, you find a thing, a thing on the market, and the thing on the market has handles, it has proper sizes, it has uses that, like, it fits the other things in your house. Uh, in experience of consumer, it is as if thing anticipated your needs. It perfectly designed to be convenient to you, and whenever you encounter anything perfectly designed to be convenient for you, you have no way to separate it. Like, nature doesn't produce things that are perfectly suited for you, like chairs. And there must have been a human who anticipated your intent. And due to anonymizing nature of market, the real human who anticipated your intent is hidden, and we have to invest subjectivity into the thing that possesses this, that anticipates our needs. So this is a subjective experience of fetishism, when for the purpose of the person consuming the thing or using the thing, it might as well be true that thing has anticipated its intentions. And when thing then doesn't perform well, it can make you indignant and angry at the thing because, well, you made to serve and you don't serve properly. Uh, so why this piece called a fetishism and social creativity? Because David Graeber traces the fetishism to any associates fetishism to any kind of change in a society. And Marx sees fetishism as a way of obscuring the exploitation. Both of these are true statements. The conclusions that you can draw from that for Marx is fetishism used by the ruling class to hide the value, to obscure it, and therefore to maintain stories that facilitate exploitation. Therefore, it is necessary to defeat the fetishism by learning more. Knowledge, expanding your perspective, makes you know more, and therefore you stop believing in fetishes. You start seeing the real value that is, for Marx, coming from labor. Doesn't matter. Uh, what is important is that we need to defeat fetishism or superstitions through knowledge. And what David shows is that fetishism is a necessary part of social creativity, and any attempt to defeat it completely denies us a theory of social change. It locks Marx included into this binary where either nothing has changed, nothing changing, or we run up against transcendental break. Uh, whatever changes will have to change radically. It has to be complete break with the past when continuation of the present is just not possible. The gradual change just phased out of this picture because it has to do with some kind of superstition. David makes his case on how fetishism is necessary for social change by showing how people who create fetishes, they do not exactly have the same perspective, not only have this perspective of superstition. They actually, when they create a fetish, they usually understand, are fully aware that they are making a pretend thing, but they also, all of them agree, choose to believe, choose to pretend, treat the fetish as a real thing, and both perspectives are simultaneously available. It is simultaneously when you create some kind of totem that can strike you with lightning if you like steal someone else's property. Well, they know that they just made it up, but they also know that it will actually happen, and they choose to believe in it, and they choose to act as if it will actually happen. The specific situation where this was recorded first time is interesting because there we had two very different cultures. Different in the sense that they have enough commonality to recognize each other as sort of similar, but they at the same time have one particular aspect of their cosmology so radically different, opposed, and alien to each other that they have to find a way to do this exchange of beads for gold somehow, find a way to create new social forms every time, because they they simultaneously need to treat each other as humans but also can't. For Europeans, it is just totally insulting to the cosmology of Africans, which has to do with nature of social of political power. We can go into it a little bit more if someone has questions. Well, that may be, yeah, maybe the last part of the story is what exactly happens with fetishism. First, it is necessary to establish that in subjective experience of the fetishist, the illusion is true or might as well be true. And for some of them, it will be choice to choose to treat it as true. For others, it will just be a given experience, that they would actually believe in it as if Christian person believes in existence of God, same way like person working in a factory in 1940 would believe that money is a commodity and embodies the, the the value of labor. In the same way, it's the same experience. Well, the last what what Michael mentioned, the last chapter of the piece on social creativity brings up all the strengths and pro proposes a theory why that should be so, why fetishism is necessary to negotiate any kind of social change. The partial consciousness, as like Marx goes through intentions of people, later sociologists and specifically psychologists find a better way of explaining this experience through childhood development. Uh, the partial here is ability to only see a part of a system one is being the only part of a whole. The fantasy here is that one of a child who does not have any boundary between himself and the world and thinks that everyone in the world can know what he can. As childhood matures, he can literally switch into someone else's perspective, like a point of view, to imagine that the person who can look behind the corner can see something that you can't. And then the third person who can see the same, that second person can see the same thing and you can't. that experience of shifting point of view into another person, and then being able to compose points of view of the different people together, uh, that experience of decentering is an example of partial consciousness. When you do not have this ability to see behind the corner, then this means you have partial consciousness. And as you mature and become capable of coordinate multiple points of view in your head, multiple points of view of other people in your head, then you start seeing picture as a whole, extending your perspective into the into the some kind of a whole. If you can see the entire whole, then there is no place for fetishism. There is no place for superstition. You know the internal mechanisms of everything. So the quest to eliminate fetishism means one has to understand the entire whole. But that can only happen when whole isn't changing over time. If the system that you're trying to understand changes over time, then you end up in being in endless race to catch up. There is always a place for fetishism. The radical example of that is when the whole that you're trying to create doesn't exist at all. When the act of fetishism actually creates a new whole. Like, for example, a tiny market where you can exchange gold for beads at a certain rate, which like the world outside doesn't exist. The history of previous transactions doesn't exist between this particular European merchant and this particular African merchant. They have to make it up on the spot, and they create some kind of overarching perspective. Well, whenever for the purposes of creating any kind of new social form, it is necessary to, when new form is already imagined but doesn't exist yet, uh, the fetishism is an act of explaining this new form so that others could emulate it if they choose. And then it may take the life on its own, or it may not take the life on its own, depends. So the binary that David lays out, not explicitly here, but in other places, is between magic and theology. The magic in anthropology being the attempts of people, of individuals, to transform the reality by supernatural means. And religion in anthropology is when people subjugate to higher authority, or when they change reality by becoming a society. The religion is magic of sociality, and magic is magic of individual. So fetishism here, for David, is a spectrum between them. When individual magic becomes a magic of two people, a magic of community, a magic of society, a magic of the world, and the constituting mechanism, the time when two people actually came up together and agreed to do something, becomes phased out, forgotten, and as ideology replaces magic, it insists that we never actually made the social agreement. That social agreement is a part of nature, and and this is how it connects to social contract and creativity. Well, as for half an hour recap of 60 pages, I hope I managed to drive a little bit, at least connected thoughts for people who want to poke holes, or want better connection in what I just described. I open up a floor.
I think Michael started from the comment.
Oh,
Michael?
I was just commenting on your discussion of people coming together and do they actually know the rules? I mean, it's a slightly more like nuanced point in relationship to what you were saying, but another sort of famous example is activists in the globalization movement all came together, and some of them had particular ways of interacting, others weren't familiar with that, and they had to kind of negotiate what they were doing. And if you become very constitutionalist, though, let's figure out all the rules exactly before we start doing stuff, you never get anything done. And so that phrase, walking while talking, was a key sort of message for people who were doing organizing to get on and go do it, to sort of just go change things, even though you couldn't see the totality as you were of everything. You couldn't see everyone's perspective. And so you had to just sort of deal with a bit of the world that you were dealing with, which was trying to guess what the other people you were working with, having a basic good idea that, yeah, we can trust these people, will do that. I was going to flag similar to this, the idea of how this basic idea of how change happens as either, oh, it's total change or revolution, or it's the same thing that happens all the time. We're just doing the same things. And on page 423, there was this, they talked about Marcel Mauss had a background of like people interacting was either total war, like the Hobbesian war of all against all, or total reciprocity. We're all a big community and we share everything, and there's no market system, there's no violence within our community. And so it's either one or the other. But in fact, it also talks about the idea of sort of partial contracts in between that time, where you maybe it's not total reciprocity. You don't always work together with everyone in your village, but you kind of have a deal with one person. You do this and I'll do that, and those types of partial agreements. And maybe that's also very similar to the argument in the paper about Marx is talking about creativity, but in his actual practice, he either seems it's revolution or capitalist production process, and the production process is always the same. So I wondered how, if people had ideas about how these ideas can help us think about the everyday type of changes that we might do.
well, you say the page, which page, which book are you looking at the Fetish?
Yeah, the article that we read, the
okay.
Fetishism
So
and
you mean
creativity, page 423. But we don't have to go into it specifically. I would just sort of, maybe I'll throw that out and see if it comes out in the various comments and conversations different people have.
There is a summary right next to what he proposed by Alan Kali, which David brings up here. So yes, the difference between the two kinds of social contracts, which both can be negotiated by different kinds of by fetishism, but the contracts themselves are different. What drives essential difference between Hobbesian war of all against all and Rousseauian noble savage, and then between total war and total reciprocity of Mauss, the summary of the difference is that either you have contracts which impose conditional unconditionality, or they impose unconditional conditionality. What that actually this calembour means, either you enter in relationships where you must obey the rules of the game to the letter, but the act of entering and exiting of the relationships is conditional. You you choose to enter, and if you don't like the rules of the game, you exit. The other kind of contract is when the rules can be sort of flexible, but the act of following them is not. The being the part of the community who has to follow this set of rules is not. You unconditionally enter into the society of law, but the laws themselves could kind of be like shifty and so on. So Total War shows exactly this situation when you do not choose to enter the war. The other party does, and you kind of find yourself in a war. But the rules of the war actually has to be renegotiated all the time. While Mauss's opposition to this total reciprocity, where you must render unconditional support to people you choose, requires you to choosing the people. You don't render your unconditional support to the society. It always starts with two individuals making the total offer of total reciprocity to each other, and then it can scale up to bigger groups or scale or not. So I see the Leon's hand.
Yes. Okay, so in order to understand fetishism a bit more, I maybe wanted to bring in an analogy of like a different context where I see a lot of similarities that might kind of shine light on how fetishism works as I'm trying to understand it. And that context, I think, is games. And for example, like sports games like football, where, games can emerge in all sorts of contexts where they can there are multiple people together and they agree to kind of engage in some sort of activity, and then certain rules might emerge and that might become more formal over time, and people will kind of recognize different stakes within this game, and they will start to experience different emotions, and there will be like the sense of like winning and losing, or something being fair or unfair within the context of that game, where the rules are actually totally arbitrary because they were just kind of in the inception kind of defining that game is totally arbitrary. You kind of find some sort of a football, for example, or a tennis ball or whatever that you play with, and then you build all of these constraints around it. And then something like that can grow something into what football is today, where it's kind of a global phenomena. And for example, there are referees that determine what is right and wrong, that kind of act as like judges in a way. And if you don't follow the rules, you are forced off the game and you are threatened with potentially losing money, all of these different things. And to me, if fetishes are kind of the same thing, just in terms of like social contracts and like contracts of exchange or contracts of mutual aid or something like that, it seems like that's kind of similar to games in a way, where there's they can kind of emerge very arbitrarily and then grow in and become more formalized. Yeah, I just wanted to put that analogy out there to kind of hopefully draw some generalizations to maybe understand fetishism more and those, yeah, and understand how like the mechanisms of it. Yeah.
The mechanisms. Yes. First of all, it is spot on the example. Anyone who saw the other person really engagedly playing in Counter-Strike or anything, trying to peek behind the monitor and hide under the monitor, that you can't say that this person is pretending, right? Well, but the internal mechanism for that, I found the best example for that is an improv theater. If you go to any kind of improv theater training, the first thing you will encounter is that we deal with the offer of another person. we honor this offer, and then we extend this offer, and then we stop playing this game and start playing another game. The simplest example that like I had in my experience is that we come to this improv training session, and the person in charge arranges us in a circle and says that we have to clap in order. One person claps, another person claps, and then it moves, right? And after some time, he asks like, "What moves?" Well, you have people in the corner and they clapping faster and faster. The experience of a person in the center is that actually clap is moving. The source of sound is kind of moving, right? And we just agreed to do that. But for outside observer, it is absolutely not impossible to imagine that there is some invisible entity flying across a circle making us clap, right? And then we could pretend that it is. The new player comes in, and if he doesn't clap, we can say, well, invisible spirit doesn't like you, go away, right? He doesn't make you clap. And then if you choose to clap, then okay, you're now like, you share our fantasy. This part of this example of play, of establishing the rules of the game, is very similar to giving an oath, which is what West African fetishism is about, which is what Madagascar examples are about. And in my personal experience, you have like people giving an oath to the banner, right? The military giving an oath to the banner of their unit, and then choosing to invest this piece of cloth with some kind of, well, you really do feel indignant emotionally when someone desecrates it. So the act of first of all, you come up with the rules, what David calls play, and then you enact the rules. The more you enact the rules, the more this supernatural power of a material token to evoke emotions becomes embedded. But then the play is about renegotiating it. Like soccer established all kind of conventions, like football, whatever. But then if you go to some kind of like people playing football, they don't bother about like kids playing football. They don't bother about rules that much. They make up rules all the time, and this is that experience of creating new rules, which eventually end up driving the game, which makes us feel as there is subjectivity, there is as we can have a relationship with something that represents the rule. I see the Christian hand, and I will just take 3 minutes maybe to explain the one concept that I was hoping to explain later. The concept is that of shifting the symbol of the value into the source of the value. Same as fetishism transforms something that doesn't have consciousness into something that does have consciousness. It is the same move as you have, say, the banner, like the picture that evokes courage. You give this picture to the person and he starts showing courageous behavior. Or in example of Marx, when money represent labor, right? But the moment there's a symbol, but the moment you can motivate people to do labor to receive that symbol, they become source of the behavior rather than symbol of the behavior. This transformation, when fetishism connects to value, when the symbol of the behavior became capable of evoking this behavior again, making people emulate it. And this is what happens when you establish the rules of the game, like you're playing, and then people gaming the game, or by gaming the game, they honor the rules that you established before. They emulate it. And this is what society is about. Society is just actions which people repeat. So long as people repeat actions, the same actions, the same society is going. If people suddenly start doing different actions to symbolize the marriage ceremony, then you're in the presence of different society. So yes, the games, especially computer games in today, should be seen as totally fruitful domain of exploration of phenomena. Yes, Christian.
Yeah, thanks. My question is a little different though. You said the moment ideology replaces magic, the social contract is forgotten. Did I remember that correct?
What is forgotten is that people have negotiated a contract. It is it turns into the fantasy of tacit agreement that is explicitly stated in the social contract of Rousseau. That is, of course, people never negotiated it, but God made it happen.
Yeah, but there was something before that was constitutive of this, and that kind of fades into the background, so to speak.
Yeah.
And that I think, ties into what you said in the beginning, is that people intentionally reproduce society every day. And I would dispute intentionally. Like what you said before, when you have the change from symbol of value to source of value, a lot of these changes, once they have happened, they fade into the background, they are forgotten. And in a way, that's where the power lies, because you don't see anymore what moves things. People just repeat the action unintentionally, I would argue. And they repeat the action unintentionally because it's kind of working, and it would be a conscious effort to change things. And a lot of stuff just runs on autopilot, so to speak. So what I agree with what you say, that people can, renegotiate, recreate society, that creativity plays a role here. The interesting part is that this, I think what you describe is a mechanism that creates something and then obscures itself, which seems pretty magical to me as well. And which reminds me, I think it was Luhmann or something who said, like, it's like this thing, the blind spot in your eye. You can see that you can't see. Well, so as long as you have these kind of it's kind of interesting, because the mechanism that is used to create the new thing then seems to make change harder, right?
When I tell about intentional actions, or when basically David explains intentional actions in a theory of value, it is not an intention of creating the whole of society. When people repeat an action, they do it intentionally, and they do it intentionally to make this the same action being repeated by other people, but they don't make it intentionally. They don't intentionally reproduce the whole of society. This is what allows hiding, obscuring the exploitation. But there is also this challenge. Exactly was directed at David when he was working on theory of value, and what David had to concede eventually to the partially is that yes, there are people who do not who reproduce actions unintentionally. His example has to do with Madagascar. He uncovers that people actually, the reproduction of charms and reproduction of political power is completely intentional. It it is intentionally encoded in a ritual. It is spoken just off stage that people understand the fetishism of it. But as he goes later, he tries to respond to the challenge, exactly that challenge, and he goes to read older materials, and there he finds that, well, actually, no, not like there are quite a lot of people whose personal experience is that actions kind of choosing them, that they repeat actions completely unintentionally. It is it is a part of that mechanism where so symbol of value becomes a source of value, and then symbolic part of it becomes forgotten, and people in a people's experience, they choose to make these actions and treat them as valuable because for them it might as well be true. His specific example having to do with people living in some kind of villages and obeying some kind of rules. Well, they don't have the chance, an option of disobeying the rules, and therefore they choose to believe that enforcing mechanism does really exist, because enforcing mechanism describes something that the the exploitation that basically nature does to them at this point in time, and they just choose to think this way. The same experience uh, that makes it possible to accumulate value in a currency, in money, which is also of this piece. It is a bigger theme in the theory of value, that the way how money can only become store of value in the first place is that you take someone and force someone to do stupid, unintentional, uh, alienated, bullshit job for life, for multiple generations, for 14 hours a day. And then, the only thing the person gets for it is money. And then this just forces person to forget, like to disregard constitutive mechanism. And in the experience of the factory worker, money do really accumulate value. It is simply true. Same as flag accumulates the value of patriotism, or, well, any number of examples you can draw from computer games or anything. So yes, there is an intentional part of recreating society, but it necessarily must have, first of all, constitutive moment, and then it needs enough people who actually see through illusion to maintain it intentionally.
Wouldn't there
Stas,
also be an enforcement by violence, though?
Absolutely. Violence is a major part of putting people into position where bullshit rules become true. If some king, that example comes from Shilluk material, but from On King's book. Well, if a king makes up a rule that anyone who doesn't do a certain movement must be killed, and then, lo and behold, you disobey the rule, you get killed. That just becomes a material reality of your life, and then rule becomes, well, as like the power of a king basically becomes magic. He actually can make things to happen to other people by just making up arbitrary rule. So yeah, violence is the major cornerstone.
But I
And
mean,
even go.
maybe just comment on that, is there's also at some level an agreement amongst the king and some of the king's people, which is, oh, if the king says something, we'll back the king up. The individual can do the violence, the king could go and kill people themselves, but that becomes much harder until there is some type of social agreement that's there. But all of those agreements, I suppose, different people will have different investment in the social agreement that's made, I suppose.
Yeah, this is I haven't finished studying it. I need to read it a few more times to use this material competently. But the overall story with kings is a story of a stranger king. When first of all you before you have kings on the ground, you have kings in heaven. People living in communities without kings already do things to each other to impose some kind of social order. They do it pretending to be like, they say that some kind of god or whatever does it, created a rule, and for that rule you need to be punished for breaking it, whatever. The problem is the problem of judgment. Human societies favor people who do not who can act without prejudice, and whenever you have a situation when you need to pronounce judgment on something, you need someone without prejudice. You need someone who can stand outside of social order and be not associated with any party. Well, there you have, in a properly constituted society, you have deficit of people who can be dispassionate about any kind of issue, and this is how stranger king idea happens. That some kind of brute comes in, tries to do violence to society. Society drives him off, and then invites him back as someone who they delegate the power of punishment. So there is constitutive mechanism where he basically becomes a symbol of society's judgment that it does to itself, but then it can run away unless you pull kings down and stop them from becoming like magical entities. They start feeling as being like it. You start really, they become fetishes. Kings become magical charms. I cannot read any comments. If anyone reads all the comments, and if there are questions in the comments, can someone just pass them on to me?
I just wanted to say that, yeah, sorry, Michael. I just wanted to mention that there is 6 minutes after 4. So maybe we can take a last question, and then Stas, if you want to announce the theme for the next group, that will be the time to do that now. Do you remember what and when is that? So then we can wrap up today and then continue next time.
Michael, go.
I was only going to say that it would be great to hear some comments from people who, a bunch of people said, oh, I've been reading David Graeber for ages just on my own, and this is a chance to talk. So we don't, maybe not questions that we have a chance to answer, but just comments. And then we're also gonna be doing this again in a month on this similar topic.
Somebody like, yeah. Okay, Stas, I think you should wrap up then.
Yeah, all right. So my original idea was to separate the fetishism from social creativity, and I seem to be incapable of doing so. Idea was to dedicate this to dedicate today to fetishism, and next session to social creativity, and then merge them together. I still feel that this was me sailing through different strands of the story, and there are plenty of things that I have omitted because, well, because it is improv theater for me right now. I would think that we could do another one on this exact piece, and then just have me speak less and have other people do more questions, do it more interactive with the audience. Yeah, the next one after that, I was thinking at looking at consumption. There is a David's piece on consumption, which is ultimately about value, how destroying things is a prototype of value in our society. I will try to connect it in with